Welcome back again, everybody, to the 1987 Supermod. I'm Brad Drake. I'm your host for this episode and all episodes. And today we are not going to be going over my AWA save. I'm going to be showing you some updates for the upcoming version 8.0 coming out. So, as those of you that have been following this channel for a while know, we use the original Gennady 2016 1987 mod. I have been updating this mod for well over a year now, just about a year and a half. And there's actually been 7 different versions. So if the one I play on the show is version 6, the one you can download is version 7. Eventually we'll do a version 7 or version 8 save, but we're having so much fun with this version 6 save that we're just going to keep going with it. So as those of you know, March 1st, a little bit earlier, I think it was, we released version 7, and I'm already hard at work here at version 8, so I wanted to show you some things that we've added for version 8. Somebody brought up the fact that they thought it would be cool to see the Polynesian Pacific promotion represented in the game. So I went ahead and did it. I created the promotion. And it was a lot of work. There's not a whole lot of information out there about Polynesian Pacific Championship Wrestling. So I did all the research here, all the work, and made it happen. So Polynesian Pacific Wrestling was operated by High Chief Peter Maivia, who is The Rock's grandfather, is the father-in-law of Rocky Johnson from 1979 to 1982. Peter Maivia passed away in 1982. His wife, Leah Maivia, then took over the promotion until it closed in 1988. They actually stopped running shows in 1986, but didn't officially close until 1988. So I went ahead and made the promotion because, well, everybody wanted to see the promotion. So what they were doing for Polynesian Pacific Championship Wrestling, by 1987, 1988, their television show was called Championship Wrestling from Hawaii. So that show, much like the AWA ended up doing in its waning days, they would show old footage on the TV show. So that's exactly what Polynesian Pacific Championship Wrestling was doing with Championship Wrestling from Hawaii. So in this game, they're still going to run a TV show, and I built the roster off the last few shows that were run in 1986. So let's take a rundown of the show here. I'm sorry, of the promotion here. The power structure, of course, Leah Maivia is in there. The head booker at the time was Lars Anderson, and the founder was Peter Maivia. Now, of course, Leah Maivia and Peter Maivia were not in the game, so I had to go ahead and create them. Okay? Now, their schedule, they're only running a TV show at this point, and that's Championship Wrestling from Hawaii, but I did create an event, and the name of it right now, we'll visit it, we'll go through events. The name of it right now escapes me, but if you look here, Dunbar, Wakayama, Ripper Collins, that was the play-by-play and the color commentary for the promotion on their last television shows. So Dunbar Wakayama was a local DJ host out of Honolulu, and of course Ripper Collins was a longtime wrestler in Hawaii dating back to the 60s who worked as the color commentator. Neither one of them were in the game. I was able to go ahead and put them in the game. And let's take a look at the contracts here. So I was able to put, like I said, I was able to put together this roster based off of the last few shows that they ran. So Alexis Smirnoff's in the game, Antonio Inoki's with the promotion, Bad News Allen, Bruiser Brody, we just talked about Dunbar Wakayama, Farmer Boy Ippo was part of the Samoan tag team, who I believe are the tag team champions at this point. Hacksaw Higgins, Hans Schroeder, Jerry Gray, Jerry Lauder worked a couple matches for them. At the end of 1986, Johnny Mantell, Keith Hart, Kendo Nagasaki, Kendo Kimura, Lars Anderson, Leroy Brown was not in the game. I went ahead and created him. He was part of the tag team title holders with Farmer Boy Ippo. And as I said before, Leah Maivia, we created him. Mad Max is also known as Eli the Eliminator. He was a former tag team champion. with Supermax, who is also known as Sam DeCero. And Sam DeCero at this point in the game is also running his own promotion called Windy City Pro Wrestling. We also had to create Sammy Sampson, who was a ring announcer, and we created Sonny Ross, who was a referee, and then we also created Tui Salinga, who was the heavyweight champion at the time. So we added all these wrestlers that weren't in here, we went ahead and added, and then let me show you the titles, okay? Let's take a look at events first. A Hot Summer Night, that's the name of it. There was a Hot Summer Night that ran in 1985, another one that ran in 1986. So if you're playing this game from the beginning, you'll have the chance to play a Hot Summer Night 3 in 1987. So that's the name of the event that they still had active that I could find. Like I said, there wasn't a whole lot of information out there. Now, for those of you that have never created a promotion from scratch or have never created anything in this game from scratch, it takes a long time to do the research, download the pictures, upload the pictures, and I probably spent about 16 hours just on Polynesian Pacific Championship Wrestling. So, they had 2 titles, okay? They had the 2 active titles. They had the Polynesian Pacific Heavyweight title and they had the Polynesian Pacific Tag Team title. They also had the Polynesian Pacific Junior Heavyweight title that was retired right at this point. And then they also had the NWA International Women's title right there. And that had also been phased out at this point. And then they also carried the NWA Hawaii titles that were retired, that were no longer in use in the promotion. So I had to create all of these titles and then put together the lineage for these titles. So as you can see, the Hawaii title alone has 119 entrances. So all of this information is in the game. All of these titles are legitimately in the game and updated. You know, the NWA Hawaii tag title had 87. All of the titles have been properly assigned. So any wrestler that held those belts properly have the belts. And then I noticed a lot of wrestlers that were on there that were mainstream names that weren't in the game, such as Lord James Blears, right? Lord James Blears was a popular guy in wrestling. He was the chairman of the Pacific Wrestling Federation and All Japan Pro Wrestling in this time period. So I went ahead and created Lord James Blears and put him in the game. This is what happens. This is the rabbit hole you go down when you create mods and you create promotions. You're going to see people that aren't in the game that should be, and then you end up creating them. We talked about Peter Maivia, and then you have to go through and look up all the titles they held and then assign all the titles to them. So I did. So for example, Peter Maivia held the NWA Texas Heavyweight title a couple times. I had to make sure to put all those title reigns in there. And then we just talked about Ripper Collins. That guy held like between the Hawaii Heavyweight and Hawaii Tag Team like 50 titles. So I made sure to get all of them in there. So this is all as realistic as possible. You're getting the true factual information. I never liked mods where they're lazy, where you go in and they're missing a bunch of stuff. This mod, you're missing very little. These are as accurate as possible. Okay, so that's it on Polynesian Pacific Wrestling. The other thing I wanted to show you was I had been wanting to get to it for quite a while. Pacific Northwest Wrestling really had an impact on pro wrestling. Was a very long-running independent territory. It was NWA affiliated, obviously. I think they finally closed their doors in 1991, but I think that Don Owens sold out in '89, and then it ran like another 2 years, and then it went under. And then they've tried to bring it back in one way or another for many, many years. Well, I read Len Denton's book recently, and it inspired me to go ahead and finish what I always wanted to start, which was to put in the actual touring schedule for Pacific Northwest Wrestling. So I downloaded their entire schedule for 1987, and I went ahead and their entire touring schedule is active here, okay? Then, of course, I found wrestlers that were on the touring, that were on those dates that weren't in the game, so I went ahead and created them. And I also noticed that the Pacific Northwest television title was actually not in effect until November 1987. So I made sure to retire that with a note for whoever plays the game as Pacific Northwest Wrestling to go ahead and activate that title in November of 1987. Okay, so the other thing I noticed was that they had they didn't have the Portland Sports Arena in there. So we went ahead and put the Portland Sports Arena in there. It's estimated they could seat anywhere from like 1,200 to 1,500. So I made it 1,300. Okay. This was the home arena for Pacific Northwest Wrestling. Okay. So they ran all their television shows and at least once a week also ran a show out of the Portland Sports Arena. So it's important that that stuff's in the game because it played a big part. And you don't want to miss details like that when you're doing a mod. You want to make sure everything's right. And if you notice, we go ahead and we got it as the home arena. Okay. Like I said, the contracts are all accurate. All of these wrestlers were in the game at this time. You're going to notice Roddy Piper, and you're going to go, what the heck is Roddy Piper doing there? When Roddy Piper retired after WrestleMania 3 to do films, he got permission from Vince McMahon to become the head booker of Portland Wrestling. Pacific Northwest Wrestling, I should say. McMahon was even cool with him being on television. He just did not want Piper wrestling. So that's what Piper did. Piper was the head booker, even though he had Len Denton really doing the day-to-day. And then he would also make appearances on TV and work as a color commentator and do stuff like that. So this was not in the game originally. So now we have that in the game. Okay, it was kind of a rare thing for Vince McMahon to allow something like that back then. But of course, I'm sure he knew Piper was always going to come back to wrestle for him. Piper was a big money draw. And Vince McMahon also always had a soft spot for his dad's old friends. And Don Owen was good friends with Vince McMahon Sr. Okay, so that's the big updates so far for 1988. I'm sorry, not for 1988, for version 8 of the Supermod. So there's a lot more to come, and this is just a little insight for you, and it's always a lot of fun doing this kind of stuff. I enjoy it. It's just, I consider myself a historian for pro wrestling, and this is a good way for me to learn more and more about pro wrestling. And it's very enjoyable for me to do stuff like this. If you take a look at this roster here, I can point out wrestlers to you that were not in the original mod that I've added in over time. Obviously, Greg Lake was not in the game. George Scallon was not in the game. We just added the two of them recently. George Scallon, of course, was the son of Arnold Scallon. He worked dates for Pacific Northwest Wrestling. Greg Lake was also not in the game. We went ahead and added him into the game. And again, this work for Scott Gonzalez is another one. I didn't add him recently, but I added him before. I didn't add Scott Gonzalez. Never mind. Sorry. I did add... no, I didn't. Snake Williams. We added Snake Williams. We created and added him too. Portland Wrestling, doing all this work for Portland Wrestling, took me a good, probably another good 6 to 8 hours to do that. So that's how long it takes to do these mods and to create everything for these mods. It's a lot of work, but it's a labor of love. So that's just a little insight to what's coming up for the 1987 Super Mod for version 8. And I don't know when it's going to come out. We'll probably continue to do some more work to it, and maybe this summer it'll be ready. So that's it for this show, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow when we get to the TV tapings for the AWA. Take care.